The alleged start to my design career was photoshopping report cards for my friends. But as they said, I'm Taylor, and I'm currently the design systems lead at Hologram, playing a hybrid product manager and lead designer role for the Dimension design system. I'm here today to talk to you about building a stronger connection between you and your would-be or could-be consumers, to try and help you establish early evangelists for your new, current, or evolving design systems program. The hard part about finding these enthusiastic advocates is that a lot of folks don't really understand our work, or are just starting out and think the day-to-day looks a lot like this. 50% design and code time, 10% maybe writing documentation, 15% responding to emails in Slack, 25% meetings. And some of this is accurate, but in reality, it usually ends up a little bit more like this. About 25% doing design and code, right? So there's still time for those things. 15% writing doc, 15% email and meetings, email and Slack, 15% meetings, 20% meetings about those meetings, 5% waiting for those meetings to start or the other ones running over, and then usually about 5% of panic in between. Or, put differently, there's the things our consumers, leaders, bosses, and managers see, our consumer-facing deliverables, right? The top of the iceberg, if you will. And then there's all the things that we do simply to enable the delivery and stability of those more visible things. The part of the iceberg that's under the water, right? Things like communication strategy, consumer support, headcount planning, cross-org collaboration, contribution model, roadmap planning, adoption tracking, roadshows and demos, and the list goes on. And there's also all that stuff that never sees the light of day, right? The deep ocean of best practices, debates about corner radius, changes we'd like to make that are well above our pay grades, etc. But I'm not here to vent about those things. This is the stuff I want to talk about today. The unseen stuff that makes a systems program successful. A lot of this work can't happen out in the open, and because of that, we're often seen as the design police, or keepers of the code, or that team that's siloed away making things we can't use. And while yes, many of the decisions we make, or the things we produce, often inform the choices of others that are many abstraction layers away from us, it shouldn't feel like our work is being done in some sort of gated ivory tower. There are many ways to address this communication gap, or cut it off before it becomes a problem in the first place. Using a sentiment analysis activity to translate actual verbatims from your current or would-be consumers into your roadmap and a list of assurances that leadership, your consumers, and whoever will be working on the system can continually reference is one of the many mechanisms you can use to ensure that what you're building has your end users in sight, ties system goals to business needs, and establishes a working agreement that everyone can feel confident in. While a lot of what I'm talking through today will be framed from the perspective of the role I play at Hologram, this kind of hybrid situation, all of it can be abstracted for use if you're a design systems team of one, you're actively working to establish a more formal program at your company or institution, you're joining an organization that already has an established system or systems team, or you're already on a systems team doing systems work and are looking to harden that connection between you and your consumers. I'm going to run through 5 main sections of this presentation. Section 1 will be establishing a subjective baseline. Section 2, identifying key players and potential activity participants. Section 3, running an activity I call hafna. Section 4, translating that data. And Section 5, building your learnings presentation. And then at the end of this, I'll leave you with a bunch of resources so that you can do all this on your own. So let's dive right in. Section 1, establishing a subjective baseline. No matter which of the scenarios I just listed matches your current role, everything starts with an analysis. Designers looking into shared libraries, engineers digging into the code, someone logging and looking at how communications are being handled, where documentation exists, if at all, and how consuming teams should, would, or could interact with the folks that are maintaining all of those different things. Now, to be clear, it's completely fine if during this activity, or even before you begin, you start to make note of things that simply don't exist, right? Or obvious areas of improvement, or current problems you observe. For example, our team doesn't have documentation, right? Or there's currently no shared code or design asset. Or we don't have enough dedicated resources. No matter what it is, capture it, write it down. And then, as the owner, lead, or core contributor of this particular work, take your best guess at some deliverables, milestones, or goals that might fill the gaps you've identified. Write them all down, no matter how ambitious or 5 years away they feel. You'll validate which items are realistic, needed, or unneeded for your particular organization at a later step. Give yourself the time and the space to dream big in what you want to achieve for this work stream. And if it's helpful, you can tag each of these terms with either near-term, long-term, stretch goal, or even like I did, bucket them by phases. This exercise will help you curate a subjective baseline. Think of it as an opinionated current state analysis. We'll come back to this audit later. Section 2, identify your key players and potential activity participants. There are a few levels to this process of identification, and they're not really in any particular order. But you should be able to identify A, your senior leadership, the ones who ultimately determine the lifespan of your program. B, your consumer groups, the teams, individuals, departments, products, departments already said, that would be your users or are your current users. C, the key players and influencers within that group, right? The discipline leads, whether by title or by presence, any relevant managers, product owners, project managers, etc. D, the ones who tend to be overlooked. In some organizations, arbitrary levels of seniority or politics sometimes silence some of those who are more junior or introverted, right? And it's important to give them space as well. And E, your fans, right? The folks that already get it. They understand what we're doing, they understand the work, they're championing it even if they don't know all the nitty-gritty. The ones that are in your corner. And it's okay if an individual happens to fit in multiple groups. That's fine. But this delineation will be helpful later. And to be clear, this isn't a list that you need to share out or circulate in any way. The purpose it serves is like a roster of folks that you want to keep in touch with, keep informed, or check with validation, or sometimes take their feedback with a grain of salt. I find it helpful to also label these individuals by 2 categories. Where they sit in the business, could be team, level, business unit, department, etc., whatever makes sense for your organization. And, more importantly for the sake of this activity, by discipline or expertise, i.e. are they a designer or an engineer? Are they a people manager or a product manager, etc. Sometimes the business context lens, the first one, isn't very clear or easy to suss out, especially if you're new to an organization, a team, or a business unit. But don't stress too much if you aren't able to cleanly map each person to one of these descriptors. You can always update this later. It's a private list after all. It is helpful, though, to determine the latter, their expertise and discipline for the activity itself. And don't get too caught up on where to list these individuals either. Want to use a FigJam mind map? Great. Would it be easier or faster to use Excel and leverage sorting and filtering? Cool. Is either route seemingly too complicated? A Word document will be just fine. Once you've got your baseline audit and your key players list, it's time to run the activity itself. Section 3, running the hafna activity. This is where the fun begins. Now, don't worry too much about taking detailed notes for this section. At the end of the presentation, I'll share a few resources that'll walk you through the instructions and provide you with a template. But to start, let me explain the acronym. Hafna stands for hopes, fears, working, not working, which represents the 4 categories of information you'll be collecting as a facilitator of this exercise. Remember that key player list you made from section 2? This is where it comes in handy. I found the most success by setting up a few separate sessions of this activity. Specifically, 1 per identified discipline or expertise. Others who I've shared this with have had more, some less, but when using this particular strategy at Hologram, it meant 5 sessions. 1 for the front-end engineers, 1 for the product designers, 1 for brand studio, 1 with the engineering managers, and the last one with the product managers themselves. A key consideration here, Having discipline-specific sessions makes sure that the right level of depth or detail is expressed in the comments you'll be capturing. It also divorces the natural groupings that sometimes folks cling to about which team they're with or if they're managers in the room. You can get really nerdy with your designers and engineers and stay high level with your managers, or vice versa. It also helps to ensure that the folks in each group are free to use the words and language that others understand, rather than having to define terminology or spend time explaining their responses during the session itself. So, book one 45-minute session per group you plan to meet with. And I recommend trying to keep the group to about 15 people or less if possible. If you need to have separate sessions or bring in someone to help you facilitate Zoom breakout sessions to facilitate with a larger group, do whatever you need to do. The timing is also relatively flexible, but I found that 45 minutes gave me enough time to facilitate, gather feedback live, have short discussion if needed, and leave time for here's what comes next kind of content. Once your sessions are on the calendar, you're ready to host the activity. In the template file, you'll see a very simple 4-quadrant layout, the top 2 being hopes and fears, and the bottom 2 being working and not working. The 4 quadrants together will paint a holistic picture of design systems at your organization. The top 2 being a focus on the hopes and fears of the future state, while the bottom are a recording of what's working and not working as of today. As part of my intro to these sessions, I like to explain something to the effect that this is meant to be a safe space, right, devoid of whatever organizational politics might exist. A place to communicate to me what's actually happening and any doubt that comes along with it. As well as what's already working, right, and things that I or the team should continue doing. These are all important facets of the activity. Once the stage is set, we dig in. Setting a 3 to 5 minute timer, start the activity by instructing your participants to record on individual stickies any hopes they have for the future systems program at whatever level of detail they want. I like to give an example, like accessibility wherever possible will be baked into whatever the design system provides, just to kind of start the conversation. Be sure to tell folks that they should still write down their comment if they already see another one similar to it on the board, or if it's mimicked by another group. You'll see why this is important in a minute. Also, make sure they don't jump ahead to other sections. The order is important here. Once they're done with the hopes section, reset the timer, and then have them fill out the fears section with the same charge. Record any fears that they have about the future of the systems program. While the fear stickies are being written, you, as the facilitator, can start sorting the hopes by theme, grouping similar sentiments together. Now, you might have to make some assumptions, and that's okay. Just use your best judgment. It's worth noting that I also like to leave on the name functionality so that if I do have questions, I know who to ask for clarification. But some folks feel they can be more honest if it's anonymous. As facilitator, make that call, but do so before the activity starts, so before they start filling out their hopes. Remember, the tone of the activity is that it's meant to be a judgment-free experience, and you want their honest, real feedback. If there are things that you feel are table stakes for the goal of your system or the systems program, add a little note with it. For example, each time it came up, I just marked accessibility as table stakes. Be selective on which themes you do this with, and I'd say try to limit it to 2 at most if you choose to mark any. When they finish with the fear section, reposition their attention back to the hopes area. Ask your participants to use the stamp feature to cast 3 votes across the themes. They should spend their votes on what's most important to them personally. They can spend their votes on one particular row, or they can cast them across different ones. If you have more than 7 themes, bump the total votes to 5. Be sure to instruct them not to spend any votes on anything you've labeled table stakes, because those things are going to happen anyway. While they're voting on the hopes, go ahead and sort the fears section in the same way. When you have those themes assigned, repeat the voting for the fears area. Voting usually takes 4 to 5 minutes, depending on how many stickies they have to read through, and you want to make sure you give folks enough time to read the themes and the detail they're in. You're now at the halfway mark of the activity. I like to close that section thanking folks for their honesty, and maybe allowing folks to elaborate or comment if time allows. The second half of the activity, you can either do as one big swoop or as individual sections. There's no sorting or voting on this one, but the commenting is the same. So set the context that while the hopes and fears sections are about the future state, what you now want them to log is what's working and not working about the current state. And remind folks again that if they see a comment that's similar to theirs, or that's already recorded, continue to record their comment as well. Candidly, this will show you where any patterns of behavior or expectation, good or bad, are occurring. For timing, I usually like to leave this part open-ended with whatever time's left in the session, meaning if you're running behind, do 3 minutes per area. If you've got padding, maybe 5 to 6. The activity as a whole is an exercise in time management and controlling conversation as a facilitator. 45 minutes feels like a lot of time when you're booking the meetings, but time will fly by. After the activity is complete, I like to close expressing thanks for their time and their candor, with an additional note: this is not the last time they'll see this content. That my intent is to meet with different discipline groups and perform this activity so that the next steps for the program can reflect an accurate picture of what they, as the consumers, directly or otherwise, need from the system, as well as what we should keep intact versus re-envision going forward. So now that you have all this awesome data, it's time to translate it into something actionable. Section 4, translating your data. You now have n number of verbatims directly from your consumers and key players. You've bucketed them into logical themes, and you've logged what's important to them through a voting exercise. The next step is to combine all of these inputs from the separate sessions and draw some conclusions. You may see some obvious things, like this. What's built in Figma one-to-one is what's deployed in code. No surprises, less QA, right? And maybe some other things that might surprise you, like lightweight wireframing tools for PMs to use during early-stage product development. But what's important is that you've created a space where these things can be communicated, expressed, and recorded. Now is where the magic happens. Part of a systems team's job is to have a clear roadmap of what and when certain things will happen, as well as be able to describe the why and the how. This is where the translation layer between all of these great folks' sentiment you've gathered turns into something actionable, specifically addressing the why and the how. Can you spot the difference between these two sticky notes? On the left, from design, responsive components, mobile, tablet, desktop, and giant monitors. And from engineering on the right, scalable design. Components should be able to handle different screen sizes, view areas without overflowing or becoming unstable. While the word choice may differ and the comments came from different groups, they're asking for similar things. Sounds like alignment to me, and a deliverable we can plan for. As you analyze the data, my bet is you'll find a lot of overlap from folks in the same group and folks across groups that will point to clear deliverables they're asking about. Remember that whole write down what you want to do in any areas of improvement you've seen from section 1? Here's how we tie it all together. Section 5, building your learnings presentation. One of the resources I'll provide in a few minutes is a presentation template, and it uses a specific we will buy to avoid format. This language structure gives you the ability to use the verbatims and themes you've collected, along with your analysis, to create a list of assurances of behaviors, processes, and deliverables, etc., for your consumer groups. In practice, it looks like this. We will, one of their hopes. Buy, one of your findings from the audit analysis turned into a goal. To avoid, something they feared. I'll show you a few examples. We will have high-quality componentry and usage documentation leveraging system consumer input and product needs by having a clear A to Z process on how components and visual style decisions happen, as well as clear contribution model for consumers to share ownership of certain aspects of the system, to avoid the design system becoming too rigid or prescriptive, not allowing for iteration, innovation, and change. This one's a process improvement. Or we will create transparency on what the system will be working on by creating a needs-based systems roadmap to avoid concerns over prioritization and long-term maintenance. This one's a core team principle or an assurance for our consumers. And last, we will ensure a design systems evolution will further create cohesion between different products across different channels by creating project-agnostic componentry to avoid a lack of visual and functional cohesion across channels. This one's a series of tangible deliverables. You'll see in the deck template that there's also an area that services the themes and quotes from the stickies themselves, giving folks that participated with different groups or other leaders and groups that weren't part of the activity itself a chance to see some of the behind-the-scenes data. This deck gives you the opportunity to say, my job is to help evolve the systems program here, but I don't want to do so without your input. And this is one of the first ways I hope to ensure that you're part of the process from the onset. Remember, change can be hard, tough, or even messy, And you might have to remind folks in the beginning that you're working with them, not against them. In an attempt to make this feel like a less daunting task, I've created some templates that you can use. They're built in FigJam and Google Slides for ease of access, but you should be able to port them to any of the tools your organization uses more widely. So take a photo of the next slide. These should get you about 40% of the way there. The other 60% will be facilitating the actual discussions within your organization and translating that data. The third link isn't related, but I'm collecting some data for a project I'm working on and would love your input. Design systems work can often feel like a thankless job. But through an exercise like this, you'll be able to point back to the discussions and your learnings presentation as a way to show that you're building the system they want by delivering the system they need. Thank you.